Hello, my lovely listeners. I'm Dr. Mary Barson.
And I'm Dr. Lucy Burns. Welcome to this episode of Real Health and Weight Loss. Good morning, gorgeous listeners. How are you this morning? I'm hoping you're having a fabulous start to your day. And I can tell you now it's only going to get better because I am interviewing the most spectacular guest of all time. Apologies to all other guests. But I have every now and then you interview a unicorn. Well, today is one of them. So I'm interviewing Dr. Terri-Lynne South. She is a GP, but on top of all of that, she's an accredited practicing dietitian, and they are rare as hen's teeth to have an accredited practicing dietitian along with the medical doctor. She's also the chair of the RACGP, so the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners Specific Interest Group in Obesity Medicine. And she's the medical director of a fabulous fabulous business called Lifestyle Metabolic. You can probably guess from all of that what her passion is. So, gorgeous Terry, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you for asking me.
You are welcome. Look, seriously, again, as I said, we have lots of fabulous guests, but very few are as supremely qualified as you to be able to talk on this area that we all love so much and I guess is so dreadfully needed within our community.
I was just going to say, it's not only do I think that I give a unique perspective being dual qualified. Lucy, you and I are of the same generation. And you know what is wonderful? I'm about to have a very special birthday ending in 0 this year. What is wonderful is I'm actually embracing that birthday in the getting of wisdom. I've been a health professional for over 25 years. And what is so, I think, lovely is to be able to look back and see the things that I now understand with greater depth and greater nuance, and also what has changed. You know, and these are some of the things that we can talk about as a dietitian. You know, why is it that I'm talking about low carbohydrate when I left graduating university with all about, you know, the Australian dietary pyramid and going for 7 serves of breads and cereals.
Yeah.
So it has been an interesting 25-year journey, and there's been ups and downs on the way. But I thought your listeners might be interested in my personal reasons for really delving into low carbohydrate. I think, Dr. Lucy, you know the story. But let me just say that, you know, I was a busy mother of 2 young children, and out of the blue, and this is how these life-changing events happen, my youngest was just turned 6 years old, and she was diagnosed with a type 1 diabetes. And this, you know, to be honest, there was a family history, and my husband and I had noticed some subtle signs, but I was definitely much more being the parent than a doctor when I noticed she was going to the toilet all the time. And there must have been some denial going on, Lucy, because I came home from work with the urine dipstick tests for her urine glucose. And, you know, I dipped it and it lit up like a Christmas tree. You know, there was no telling that it wasn't right. And in my head, I'm going, oh, maybe they're off. You know, maybe this is not a real result, because, you know, as a parent, you know, I was like, no, I don't want this to be real. And I did take my daughter the next day to see my GP, and she did the finger prick, and, you know, the level on the blood glucose meter was high. And my GP's looking at me going, Terry, why didn't you take your daughter straight to emergency? And I said to her, because I wanted you to tell me it wasn't real.
Yes.
I wanted you to tell me that the measuring I was doing at home wasn't real. Anyway, long story short, she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and we were very privileged to be able to have her on the best therapy straight away, which was a insulin pump. So she has a little cannula under her skin, and she's constantly getting insulin titrated to her blood glucose, and she's on a continuous glucose monitor. And we came home from hospital about a week later, and then all of a sudden our world has turned upside down, and we have to count on behalf of our 6-year-old daughter every single gram of carbohydrates she consumes. Now, as a dietitian, I knew what foods had carbohydrate in them. I have a fairly good idea of serves. We would learn as serves or portions of carbohydrate when I used to talk to people with type 2 diabetes as a dietitian. But now certainly with the insulin pumps and sometimes with the pens, it's all about grams. So all of a sudden, every single gram of carbohydrate she had to eat, we had to count. And oh my goodness, that's when it really came crashing, in our faces of, oh my goodness, Eliza, we've just given you, your usual takeaway meal. I can't believe how much carbohydrate that has in it compared to what we would have had. And then to see those effects immediately on her blood glucose level. So it was through practicality and happenstance that we as a family actually really started to reduce our carbohydrate intake, because we could see dramatically how much easier it was to control our little daughter's blood glucose levels. So that happened maybe 6-7 years ago. And we've been mindful of carbohydrate, both for her, for us as adults, and for us as a family. And we've had some challenges along the way.
Oh, I'm sure you have. I mean, it's so interesting, isn't it? When you've got the CGM, so the continuous glucose monitor, you actually get an insight into exactly what's happening with her that, general people don't. The other things that affect it, apart from food, like I'm sure sleep and stress and illness and all of those other things that we have no idea about.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I have actually, when one of her sensors was literally just about to run out, I did wear it with her for a little while. One was to taught her, to be wearing it out and around the shops, and for her to see me wearing it, because she'd get, quite concerned that people were coming up to her and pointing at this thing sticking out of her arm and asking about it. So in order to, sort of help her get used to it, I did the same thing. But I also was interested to see how my blood glucoses were responding to my intake. And I had gestational diabetes. I have the genes. That means if I don't be very careful, I have a very, very high risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And here I could actually see it. I could see my body's difficulty in adjusting to my carbohydrate load in real time. And again, it was a fascinating thing and very much helps you. You can't have anything better than your own personal biofeedback is what we're talking about with these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've worn a CGM before too. And it's interesting because I did mine when my carbs were very low. And look, honestly, most of the time my carbs are very low because it just suits me to eat that way. But I had just these rock solid glucoses. The variation was between it was actually at the low end. So maybe between about 3.8 and about 5. And it was like it never varied. And it was like, wow, it's amazing. Your food does make a difference to your blood glucose.
Absolutely. And what's been interesting with my daughter is, some of the artificial sweeteners and all of those sorts of things, may not have calories, but they actually make her blood glucose go up. So it's very interesting to see the difference between what it says on the tin or on the piece of paper or the average and all these sorts of things, and to see it different in an individual. And that certainly is something that I often counsel my patients about, is you can have statements and you can have research, but that's often what is average. But those averages and those statements won't necessarily apply to the person in front of me, that patient in front of me, from an individual and a personal response to something, whether that is an intervention, a diet, a medication, or any of those things.
Oh, absolutely. And I couldn't agree more with you. I just think that idea that sometimes we'll take public health advice, population health advice, and then apply it to an individual, and it doesn't always work. And I mean, we can look at, something as basic as the BMI for that as a, the BMI was never supposed to be an individualized tool. It was a public health tool, but yet it's used on an individual level.
Yeah, I have real problems with the BMI. And as you know, Lucy, my special interest as a GP in this metabolic space particularly has to do with weight control and health conditions associated with excess weight. So that's where my business name from the metabolic part of things come from, that point of view. And yes, I do have real problems with BMI. I'm really looking forward to coming to the the Low Carb Road show down in Brisbane, because that's actually what I want to expand on. So my little topic on that day will actually be unpicking what the definition of obesity is, what its true definition is if I consider it a chronic complex health condition, and then the sort of things that influence that chronic complex health condition and management options, but particularly looking at how low carbohydrate may help both the metabolic consequences of having a higher BMI, as well as if people are wanting to have some weight loss for other reasons, whether they be mechanical, mental health, not just metabolic. I also think that when we're talking about weight loss, we're not necessarily saying that someone has to get to a target BMI or they have to get to some arbitrary healthy weight range. For someone to be able to do something mechanical that is really important to them, such as be able to, tie up their shoelaces or have less pain from their severe osteoarthritis, or be able to fit in, public transport to go on a long-awaited trip, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to reach this, as I said, very arbitrary BMI. It might actually only be 5 or 10% weight loss. So it doesn't have to be huge amounts to necessarily have improvements in metabolic health, mental health, as well as mechanical aspects as well. It's also individual. So sometimes I feel as though we throw the baby out with the bathwater when we have these very black and white and polarizing views. I love working in the middle. I love working in the nuance, and I'm very much about individual holistic care. But these things that we talk about, which is, health concerns of living in a larger body, it's so nuanced and complex.
Yeah,
but I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we often talk about this idea, though, that if you're in the middle, it doesn't get as much traction. It's a bit boring. It doesn't, we don't have, 500 million Instagram followers because I'm not banging on about one extreme view that I don't deviate from. And the same with you. It's like Mary and I are always talking about, we're loud and proud omnivores, but no one cares about that. If you're plant-based or if you're carnivore, they're the two extremes. You get quite noisy, but no one cares about the omnivore.
That's right.
So within extremes, there is always some people who do well at those extreme ends, but the majority of people need that nuanced in the middle, holistic, somewhat unsensationalized approach.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But what I do find is, that's, as you mentioned, some individuals will do very well at extremes, but not all people do that. So again, when a patient comes to see me, I almost feel like I'm a little bit of a detective trying to work out, what are the clues in their history, in their current concerns that are going to give me ideas of what is most likely to be the best way forward for them. And then I, as an expert, have a good research, theoretical and practical understanding of how to actually try and achieve that. And if something doesn't work, readjusting it. The chronic test, reflect, how's it going, all of those sorts of things. I'm not a one horse race. I've got multiple options, which I think is really important to be able to have there to apply to that individual in front of me.
Ah, absolutely. And as you alluded to earlier, that obesity is a complex condition. There's not just one cause. And I mean, I'm stating the obvious there. But the interesting thing is that, there are companies, influencers, people who will tell you that it is. And I think recently, and again, I'm sort of delving into my mind palace to retrieve a memory, where someone in America who was very influential, who said that obesity is a genetic condition, so there's nothing we can do about it. And it was like, well, there's a sliver of truth in that. There's definitely genetic implications. And you just talked about having gestational diabetes, indicating that, you have insulin resistance, you're genetically prone to develop type 2 diabetes and potentially obesity as well. But just because you've got the genes doesn't mean you have to have the condition.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I find that a lot of, black and white statements, there's often a kernel, just a little kernel of truth, but it's been reduced down to so much that it's almost, you're like,
yeah,
it's almost not helpful at all. And look, us as human beings, we want simple, all right? We want black and white, but it really is hard to do when something is naturally so complicated.
Yes. And in fact, I think the classic black and white question that we get asked, I'm sure you do too, is, people say, oh, Dr. Lucy, that all sounds good, but look, it's a bit complex. Have you just got a meal plan I could follow? I'll just do that.
I know, right?
Yeah. And,
just tell me what to do.
Tell me what to do. And, and look, the temptation with that is that will work for a week or two until things, life, it gets busy or complex or in the way, and suddenly that plan just falls by the wayside.
That's exactly right. You and I are humans as well, and we actually, also get waylaid by some of our own biological drives and our psychology and all of these sorts of things. And particularly one with myself is in regards to motivation. We think that motivation is something that you will always need or always be there, and if you don't have it, you beat yourself up. Motivation goes like a sine wave. We're not meant to be highly motivated all the time. Motivation goes up and down, and often, Lucy, you and I will see people when their motivation is on the upswing, but you and I also know that we can't expect that motivation to stay so high, and that literally, life, otherwise, known as SHIT, happens,
yes,
right?
Yes.
You wouldn't be a human being if it doesn't happen. And, there are lucky people that tend to have periods of stability. But right now in these times, I think a lot of people are finding that they are having to adjust to lots of chronic stress, but often you'll have these completely out of the ordinary big stresses that you can never imagine are going to happen, but do to everybody. And yes, if you're having to have a lot of motivation to stick to your new lifestyle, it will go out of the window when something more important or more stressful or more urgent comes along. So definitely any sort of change to lifestyle, whether it's a change in your sleeping, your activity, your exercise, your eating, your drinking, your socializing, any of those sorts of things, they really do need to be something that you could conceivably do for the rest of your life, which ultimately means automatic, habitual, and not requiring super amounts of effort and motivation.
Ah, absolutely, which, is the whole reason dieting fails, because dieting is always a short-term, fairly intense plan with the idea that you're going to lose, 10 kilos in 10 weeks or 5 kilos in 5 weeks. Like there's always some sort of end point, and you're going to do something that's reasonably extreme because, it will work short-term, but it is not a long-term solution. It just, I have a little chat I do called the maintenance myth, because the maintenance myth indicates, and I mean, I'm sure you've done dieting, Terry, in your, again, in your younger years, where I used to do this and it would be hard and I'd be hungry and I'd go to bed early so I didn't have to eat and all these crazy kind of techniques that I would do because I was very disciplined. But there was always the light at the end of the tunnel was always this idea, as soon as I get to my goal weight, I'll be in maintenance. And maintenance, the promise was more food.
Yes, exactly.
And so, you do that, you get there, maintenance, more food, yay, and just sneak back on. You think,
Yeah. I have a saying that my patients will know, which is, one, I think that any sort of weight loss is difficult, but keeping it off is actually harder.
Yeah.
I almost feel as though you need a plan A for weight loss and a plan B for keeping it off. They often are quite different.
Yes, and they're not more food.
No.
Because but again, that's the thing. That is the thing. Do this and then you can go into maintenance and you'll be allowed using, all sorts of permissive language, you'll be allowed to eat more. And it's like, okay, well, how about we just, they are different. But I think in some ways, one of the things that we will sometimes say is that the thing you do to lose the weight is the thing you do to maintain the weight. So therefore, don't do extremes because it won't work. And again, it's that kernel of truth, isn't it? Because it will actually work short term. So if you only want to lose 5 kilos to go to a wedding and you don't care if you put it back on again, well then, okay, run off and do a diet. But if for most of us, if you want to actually change your life, change your health, then it's not about a short-term fix.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I say too. Whatever you do to start that ball rolling from a weight loss point of view, you really need to be thinking that you can do it for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where the psychology comes in, doesn't it? And understanding those stories.
Absolutely. The psychology of behaviour change and as well as what drives you to do what you currently do.
Yeah. I love it. So, Terri-Lynne, this has been brilliant, and I can't wait to hear your talk at the Low Carb Roadshow in Brisbane. So, gorgeous peeps, if you would love to come and hear Terri-Lynne, an absolute expert in obesity management and obesity medicine, please, you can buy tickets at the Low Carb Roadshow Brisbane, and the links will be in the show notes. But Terri-Lynne, if people want to actually follow you, how do they find you? Where do they go?
Yeah, I do have a website, which is www.lifestylemetabolic.com. Oh my God, that's a long word, .com.au. And a Facebook page as well. And I am on Instagram, but I'm a bit old school. I don't really know how it works.
Oh, I know.
Let alone TikTok. Don't even let me go there. Oh gosh, I'd get myself into trouble.
Oh, I know. Don't worry. We're a bit the same. Although we've learnt Instagram, and that's the thing that sometimes you have to, and we tell all our peeps this, and I'm sure you do too, that, learning new things is hard. And when it's hard, we will resist it because it's hard. Why would we do something that's a bit hard? But once you get the hang of it, then it becomes easy and second nature. So,
absolutely. Yes. I've jumped in the deep end with regards to all things social media. I'm still learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's wonderful because, as you learn, you get better and it gets easier. Metaphor for life.
Yes.
Wonderful. All right, gorgeous woman. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And again, for being a speaker, I think that people are going to get all sorts of wealth out of your talk, and it's going to be brilliant.
It's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you.
So, my lovely listeners, that ends this episode of Real Health and Weight Loss. I'm Dr. Lucy Burns.
And I'm Dr. Mary Barson. We're from Real Life Medicine. To contact us, please visit rlmedicine.com.
And until next time, thanks for listening. The information shared on the Real Health and Weight Loss podcast, including show notes and links, provides general information only. It is not a substitute, nor is it intended to provide individualised medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, nor can it be construed as such. Please consult your doctor for any medical concerns.